Hello all. So this 15-minute forum is all about fluency building with your students. So this is basically getting them to recall information in an incredibly fluent and easy way. So fluency is the idea that students can recall from memory with very minimal effort the information that's required. There's an automatic recall from the knowledge that they've got. And retrieving with ease is really, really important because it reduces the burden on their working memory. So if you remember from the Rosenshine's principles things we've gone through, that working memory, really where students think and where we all think, is incredibly small, and it can't be overloaded. So ensuring there's fluency of knowledge means the student's working memory is not overloaded and they've got more capacity to apply, evaluate, and all those higher order skills. So good learning processes include a very high level of consolidation. And with this is that we have to do as much retrieval as possible and consolidation at the start of lessons, throughout the middles of the lessons, and then again at the end. Really good learning means that they've all consolidated the information and there's fluency and really good retrieval. Ultimately, learning is, can they recall that information to you from memory? It would be really effective learning. So daily reviews, we know from Rosenshine's principles that daily, weekly and monthly review is really, really critical. And daily reviews can help lead to that fluent recall that we're seeking from the students. Rosenshine, again, probably worth just stressing and just to remind you, they look at master teachers, the most impactful teachers, Rosenshine, and also that research on memory and cognitive processing. What they find in their study, in their 9 principles, is the most effective teachers spend the first 5 to 8 minutes of every lesson recalling prior learning. It is worth stressing from young as well, though, that retrieval practice isn't always about quizzing. As much as possible, it's the task of getting learning out. So what I found in my practice is I will do 3 minutes of quizzing, of low-level quizzing that gets, larger each lesson. It builds on all the previous learning. But I really, really would recommend trying retrieval grids with the students. So I know James Bedwell, I know Michael Bowen are really, really, really rave about retrieval grids, and I have to agree with them. So retrieval grids, you'll see you've got these 9 slots. Put sociologist in these slots, equations, terms, but at the start of the lesson for 5 minutes, from memory, they have to retrieve whatever is in these 9 sections. After those 5 minutes, they then get 4 minutes to go back to their grid and find the gaps and fill them in. Do it at the start of every single lesson. And I particularly, as I'm walking around and checking, I will make a note as a teacher of the key patterns in the class, of the ones that we aren't recalling as well. So retrieval grids are really, really important to help get that fluency that's needed. And it's much harder because they have to think of what the person said or what the equation is or what the legislation is with no prompts at all. And really, really, really recommend them. And that leads on to the point about reteaching. We can't get fluency from them, or we can't continue the lesson if 3 to 4 of the learners have the same gap. So this is the whole point about reteaching when necessary. So if they've done this retrieval grid, and I notice that we're really struggling with sociologists Brake, Phil Cohen and Hawthorne Jefferson, then I literally just spend 2 minutes going, right, Hawthorne Jefferson said that it's about resistance, remind me. Brake talked about optimism, or tell me what Brake said, optimism. And Phil Cohen's symbolic solution. And on the board, we'll put those 3 terms for those 3 sociologists. Just a little bit of reteaching is really, really, really critical. Because if we're really serious about closing the gaps for the weakest students, we can't afford to rush through content and just leave them behind. So I know that our curriculums are really heavy, But the point is if we're losing them at different points, we can't continue to work through the content if every single learner in the room fell off at different points of the lesson or different points of the course. So reteaching, even if it's short, is really, really critical. Guided practice, so you'll get from this. There's a lot of links specifically to Rosenshine's principles, but guided practice is incredibly important. It helps that fluency. Guided practice, to remind you, is about rehearsing with the material. It's about playing with it, using it, so that they have a much better understanding. So rehearsal is really helpful if they're asked to summarize the information on whiteboards. So brain dump, summarize that piece of legislation, go around and check. And students have to be involved in extensive practice in order to be able to have any automatic knowledge recall. So they have to engage with as much practice as possible. Quizzing, retrieval grid, 5-question quiz, brain dump, Nearpod, gap fills throughout the lesson. They have to be given as much intensive practice as possible if any of that knowledge is going to become automatic, which is obviously what we need from them. Now, what guided practice really helps with is reducing feedback loops. So if they're on their whiteboards, they're going back through in their brain dumping and we're going round, errors are easily corrected. So they're on their whiteboards and they've just said, Phil Cohen looked at optimism. No, that's not quite right. Just get rid of Phil Cohen. Can you just have a think for me or go back to your notes? We want to try to shorten the feedback loops. Using whiteboards and getting them to summarize, do the retrieval grids. When we're checking and going round, we're shortening the feedback loops. We haven't got a right on 15 essays out of a class of 30. You've misunderstood. It's not Phil Cohen who says that. The feedback loops are shorter if they're using their whiteboards and they're practicing on those whiteboards as well, really shortening those feedback loops. And the core of improving learning is to shorten the feedback. Is they haven't got to wait a week for you to have marked the 5 markers to get them back and to 7 of them be told the same feedback or criticism. If I'm asking them to do something on whiteboards, 4 of them have an error. I pause the lesson. I just need to clarify that validity is not a method. Let's clarify what we mean by both those terms. Stop, pause. My rule is if there's 3 or 4 learners in the room who've got the same error, that's a reteaching opportunity, regardless of what that error is. There's too many of them for it to be an individual thing where they need to look back at their grid and get it. That's a reteaching opportunity. Last point on this kind of fluency, and again, fluency is about retrieving information with automatic, gets rid of that kind of load on that working memory, is what is your mid-lesson retrieval procedure? You've done your starter, you've got your plenaries, I know they're very traditional terms, but you've got those. But what is your mid-lesson procedure? Or you've just told them 2 sociologists, what's your procedure to get them to retrieve? So we all need a tried and tested routine that involves checking every single person in the room has learned the material. Again, gave this example, we went through Rosenshine's, but it's I can't remember who I nabbed it from, but you wouldn't let them jump out of a plane if you hadn't have checked every single one of them had correctly put on their parachute. So the same is true. If we've inputted learning into the lesson, what is our retrieval procedure? We've chunked, then we check. We chunk, then we check. What is our routine that checks? Now, for me, I genuinely don't know how I taught lessons before I keep their mini whiteboards on the desks all the time. I can't teach a lesson now without mini whiteboards because I feel like they're one of the only ways I can think of to get every single learner checked, that they understand, that they are on board, that they know what I mean, that they've learned, that it's effective. I can see if the skills been developed. I can see if they're now ready to move on to the next sociologist or move on to independent practice. Because again, on a whiteboard, they're doing the 5 marker on the whiteboard, so I can check for errors before they get anywhere near pen to paper. So it's worth really considering when you're doing your chunk and practice, what is your retrieval procedure, so that you can check everyone's learned. For me, it's whiteboards. It'll be really interesting to see if you've got anything different at all. So, as always, thank you for your time. If you have any questions or any suggestions, please let me know, and I'd love to chat about it. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.